What's up, friends? We made it. It's the end of 2023, and every year I try to do a recap of my favorite camera gear I covered, so this year was insane. So I'm not going to cover everything, but I'll cover what I liked most. Also, stick around to the end. I'll give you my predictions for 2024 and also what my favorite camera was this year. With all that said, let's get into things because this was a wild year. So Sony pretty much dominated this year with camera releases, but I want to go back to the beginning of this year where I reviewed the Canon R6 Mark II. Now this camera wasn't released in 2023, but I didn't get my review unit until early 2023. So I made a review on the camera. I also compared it to the A7 IV because they're similar in terms of specs and price. But the R6 Mark II is an awesome camera which Canon improved drastically over the original R6. It's got a new 24 megapixel full frame sensor, 12 frames per second mechanical shutter, 40 frames per second electronic shutter, oversampled 4K video up to 60 frames per second, 10-bit 422, and that's all without a crop, which is an advantage over the A7 IV. The ergonomics are great, and the camera's just an overall awesome unit for the price. It's got very solid autofocus, as good as Sony, especially when it comes to eye autofocus and subject detection. Now, at the end of that video, I kind of had a few concerns when it comes to the video because it does have a bit of a cripple hammer there where you can only shoot in IPB with a lower bit rate, and it's limited to C-Log3, which isn't the best for dynamic range. I also mentioned that the lack of third-party autofocus lenses is kind of an issue, but I did hear that Canon was potentially going to open up the RF mount to third-party glass, so we'll see what happens in 2024 if we get some third-party lenses in there. Although I mainly cover camera gear, I also try and cover the flagship phones that come out in that year because the cameras on these phones are getting so good now. And as a professional photographer, it's exciting to see where this tech is headed and also how close things are getting to emulating the look of a real camera when it comes to portrait mode. So of course, the first phone I covered in 2023 was the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, and instead of doing a review, I compared it to the A7 IV in portrait mode in a studio because that's where we can really see how close things have gotten in a controlled setting. Now this could be the best flagship phone that came out this year, but I also feel like it didn't have a massive leap over the S22 Ultra. They did crank up that main camera to 200 megapixels over the 108 megapixels, which is already insane. But in terms of processing on the images, the S22 Ultra was already awesome, and this is just a nice little bump in image quality. They didn't really change the design. It kind of looks exactly the same as an S22 Ultra, which is fine by me because I actually kind of like the look of that design. I like that it has small camera bumps. But anyway, if you want to see more about this, you can watch the video. I'll have everything linked in the description. And I also did a video comparing it to the iPhone 14 Pro in RAW. Now, this is the start of where Sony had an insane year of releases. They dropped two full-frame lenses, the 20-70 f4G, which I think is an underrated lens because it is f4. It's going to deter a few people, but it covers all the sweet spots if you're looking for a small zoom lens, and it's going to be awesome for travel. It could be a good kit lens, or it could even be a good first lens for some people getting into the Sony system. After that, they dropped the 50mm f1.4 G Master, which I really love shooting with, and if you check out that video, we got some awesome portraits in that review. And fun fact, 50mm is actually my favorite focal length for portraits because it still gives you a nice subject isolation without really any distortion, but it's still wide enough that you can see the environment. So I really like that lens, and it's also way cheaper than the f1.2 G Master, and honestly, I don't think many people are going to be able to tell the difference between f1.2 and f1.4. So continuing with Sony's dominant takeover of releases this year, they launched the ZV-E1 in March, which is basically a mini A7S III without an EVF for around $1,300 less. And the ZV line is aimed at content creators, so it's not so much for the pro market. So this thing is all plastic, but it does house that 12 megapixel full frame sensor, and it has the exact same specs as the A7S III. So it does full frame video up to 120 frames per second, 10-bit 422, which is insane. Now with this camera release, it also included a lot of new features like AI reframing, which basically zooms in and crops and follows you around the frame, kind of like a robot camera guy. Now I don't think that I would use this feature too often, but I've talked to a lot of other content creators that bought this camera and they love it. So maybe I would use it. But they've also added dynamic active stabilization, which improves the image stabilization by using enhanced digital stabilization. And it looks really good, but it comes at the cost of a large crop. And I actually debated buying this camera for YouTube, but I can never pull the trigger. And maybe someday I will buy a used one at a cheap price, and it'll be an awesome talking head camera. Now after that, there was a bunch of other stuff I covered, things that I don't think it's worth bringing up in this video. But in June, Fuji did drop the X-S20, and I did a fun little road trip in my old 1965 Ford Galaxy that I'm restoring. And I wanted to get some shots with it before I did the body work while it's still kind of beat up looking. And so we got some awesome shots. I really like that little camera, and there's nothing really overly exciting about it. I just really like shooting with it. It's rocking the old 26 megapixel APS-C sensor found in the X-T4, X Pro 3, but has the newest processor, so the autofocus is a lot better, and that's depending on the type of lens you use. The IBIS is also improved. It's up to 7 stops, which is a lot better than the XS10. And I don't know what else to say. It's a great little camera. Make sure to watch that video. It's one of my favorites I shot this year, and we got some awesome shots. Then Sony slapped back with the A6700, which was kind of a needed update in that A6000 line. It's basically an FX30, but in an A6000 style body. So it has the 26 megapixel APS-C sensor in it that's found in the FX30. It can shoot 4K video up to 120 frames per second, 10-bit 422. But I don't want to spend a ton of time on this camera. You'll just have to watch that video. And again, all the links to the gear or cameras that I talk about in this video will be linked in the description. Before I get to the camera of the year, I want to bring up today's sponsor, and that's Insta360. If you don't know, Insta360 launched the new GO3 this year. It's a super small action camera that you can actually wear. And I've had the Insta360 GO2 for a while now, and I've used this as a POV angle in some of my videos as well as Instagram. And it's always cool to see that perspective because you can see the back of the camera and what I'm shooting at the same time. And they literally just came out with the new Black Edition GO3, which I'm really stoked about because I'm always wearing black. And this kind of hides better on the clothing I'm wearing. And the GO3 is really cool. I like how the new action pod turns into like what your typical action camera would look like. It's got a bigger housing with a flip up touchscreen so you can now see what you're actually shooting. Before, you'd have to connect to the app and see a live feed of what's on the camera on your phone, and also to make changes. Now you don't have to, so this is pretty dope. And you can even take it out of that action pod and still have a wireless feed to the back of that screen. It shoots 2.7K, 30 frames per second video, but you can also do higher frame rates, but that's in lower resolution. Has amazing stabilization. It's got that flow state stabilization. You can even set it to a 360-degree horizon lock, so no matter what angle you have the camera at, it's gonna stay perfectly level. So I'll be using this more often as a POV angle in the video so you know what camera I'm actually using when you see that interesting angle. And if you want to know more about the Insta360 GO3, check the link in the description. All right, so something new to this channel that I have not reviewed much of is Nikon, and that is the Z8. And I've been following what Nikon's been doing the last couple of years because they've been doing some cool stuff, but I've never really had a chance to try out anything they've been using. And the Z8 is an amazing camera. It could be one of my favorite cameras of the year. I guess I like potatoes now. It's rocking a 45 megapixel full frame stack sensor. It has insane fast readout. It can do 20 frames per second burst shooting in RAW, even up to 120 frames per second JPEG if you want to just shoot that action and make sure you don't miss the moment. This camera is a chunky beast though. It reminds me of an old DSLR. It flicks a switch in my head that says it's a working camera. It's just a workhorse that's going to take a beating. The video specs are also insane on this camera. 8K 60p, 4K 120p, all 10-bit 422. Can also shoot 12-bit internal RAW video, which is impressive because I don't think there's a lot of cameras out there in the hybrid mirrorless world that can do that. It's also really good at photography, and I found the autofocus to be really, really good, but I also noticed that it did miss a lot of shots when it came to eye detection, and I'm sure with some firmware updates, it's going to get way better. But this is not a cheap camera. I mean, this camera's coming in at $4,000 US, but you are getting a serious camera that's probably going to last you years and you will never really need to upgrade. This is where we enter the 2 months of hell for me, not only because I was busy with client work, but Sony went on a wild rampage and dropped 2 lenses and 2 cameras at the exact same time. And all I wanted to do was take a week off to work on personal stuff, but the universe was like, no, you get no time off. And Sony released the 70-200 f4 G Mark II and the 16-35 f2.8 G Master Mark II. Now these are just updates to already great lenses with new XD linear motors and improved optics. The 70-200 also got macro capabilities. And then shortly after that, like I said, they released 2 cameras at the same time. They released the A7C Mark II and the A7CR. And I made videos on all of these things, except I didn't get around to finishing my A7CR video. I do have a video for that, and I did a few portrait sessions, but there just wasn't a lot of time and there was so much going on. I never finished the video, so you have to wait till the new year and I'll make sure I get that out. Basically, these 2 cameras are just smaller, compact versions of other Sony cameras already. So the A7C II is like a mini A7 IV, and the A7CR is like a mini A7R5. So they do lack some features, but they also gain some of the new features that those older cameras don't have. And if you watch anything, make sure to check out my video on the A7C II. I didn't get a lot of views on that for some reason, and it's one of my favorite videos I did this year. We got some amazing images, and yeah, just make sure to check that out. Now we're up to iPhone season, and of course I made a few videos on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I feel like Apple didn't really make any massive improvements to the camera system this year. They did add a 5x camera to the Pro Max, and it's good. But I think the most impressive thing they did with this phone this year was add ProRes log video. Now, I know that's not a feature that most normal people are going to ever need, nor should they ever even shoot log, because the files are massive and it requires you to color grade it in post. But the footage from the Apple log is amazing, and I can easily match that footage to any of my Sony cameras. And honestly, you probably wouldn't even know that I shot it on an iPhone unless I told you. And this is awesome for professionals as well as content creators that want to get a little bit more creative with their video, because there's no other phone that has video like this. And I did shoot a whole video on Apple log. I have not finished editing that as well. I've been very busy, guys. I've been moving. I've been working on a new set. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's probably up there with the best video you're going to get out of a phone, next to the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, which I also did a video on, and it has S-Cinetone picture profile, which I'm actually shooting in right now on my A7 IV. Of course, I covered a lot of other things this year, but I'll leave you here with this last one, and that's the Sony A9 Mark III, because this camera is impressive. Now, I didn't get enough time to really make a proper video on this camera when I was in New York at that launch, but I did post a quick reel on my Instagram, which got 1.2 million views, of me just holding the camera up, showing how fast that burst rate is and the autofocus. It's got the first that we know of 24 megapixel full frame global shutter in a mirrorless camera. Not only that, it can shoot 120 frames per second raw photos, which is wild. It's going to be amazing for sports, action, wildlife photographers. You are going to be happy if you buy this camera, because you'll never miss the moment. It also has pre-capture, so as you half press that shutter, it'll take 1 second of photos in that burst before you actually press the shutter down in case you miss the shot. It's got you covered. And that global shutter is also awesome for flash photographers as well, because now you don't have to worry about the flash sync speed issues. It can do up to 1/80,000th of a second with no banding. And outside of photography, this is also an impressive video camera as well. It can do full frame 4K 60, no crops, 10-bit 422. It's got a global shutter. You're going to have oversampled video. It has no rolling shutter issues because it is a global shutter. And I will get a review unit in for testing soon. I know some people are already getting theirs. Hopefully I'll get mine soon and I can do a proper review on that camera. If you made it this far, I appreciate you guys. I just want to say thanks for watching. I'm still not 100% doing this full time on YouTube. This year was pretty close. I probably spent like 80% of my time doing YouTube this year. And in 2024, I'm hoping that I can transition to full time on YouTube so I can bring you guys more content and better content. But I do have a few predictions for 2024 when it comes to camera gear. I know Sony went wild this past year, but I feel like next year is going to be also the same. The A7S III is coming up on 4 years since its release. I know that seems wild, but we're probably going to see an A7S IV, and I can't see it doing 4K, so it's going to have to be 6K. So there's probably going to be like a 19 megapixel sensor in it for 6K video. I heard some people even say that they might drop the S line and just go FX3 Mark II. I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen, but we're looking at a release next year because it'll be 4 years. It's also coming up on 3 years since the A7 IV came out, and so we might actually see an A7 V, but it's more likely that we're going to see an update to the flagship A1 instead, so an A1 Mark II, and that's going to be wild to see what they do with that camera because it has to be the flagship, and it has to be better than the A9 Mark III. But I don't want to talk about Sony anymore. Let's talk about someone else. I think Fuji will have a bunch of releases in 2024 because they were pretty quiet this year. 100% we're definitely going to see an update to the X100V. There's a chance they'll put that 40 megapixel sensor from the X-T5 into it. And who knows, they might do a different lens or at least update the lens. But it's going to be cool to see what they do with that. The X100V has become Fuji's most popular camera out of nowhere. And I'm pretty sure they're cooking up something good for that. We'll probably also see a updated X Pro 4 with that same 40 megapixel sensor and a new processor. But the question is, what will they do with the screen? Are they going to go back to that weird flip down screen, or will they go to like a more traditional fixed or tilt screen? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Now, when it comes to Canon and Nikon, I'm not sure what they're going to do, but I know that Canon's definitely going to have an update to the R5. So we're probably going to see an R5 Mark II, and the specs have to be insane because the R5 is already impressive. They might even do something similar to what Nikon did with the Z8 and throw the kitchen sink at that camera. 2024 is going to be a busy year, and I've already got a lot of things lined up. I'm stoked to show you guys. And of course, I moved to a new place. I've been moving the last couple months. This is not the YouTube set, but I'm really stoked to show you guys what the new YouTube set's going to look like. Thanks for hanging out with me this year. I'll see you guys in the next one. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. Happy New Year.